Was this the first time you dated someone who was culturally different from you?
Yeah, it was. Being completely frank with you, there were other people in that experiment who were more suitable for me.
Maria said it as well on an interview. You and her actually knew that you were going to say no. Why let your heart get over your head?
The way that wedding episode was shown was that it looked like I'd jilted Maria at the altar, which wasn't the reality of the situation, sadly. And I was obviously disappointed with how that was portrayed. Reflecting on that now, it's made the traits that I look for in a partner a lot more specific.
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Are you picky?
Physical attributes I'm not even going to talk about because I think that's so dependent on the person. But what the show's made me realise is I think a lot of guys think that I need to have sex with someone to figure out whether or not we've got a connection. Whereas actually the approach should be, I need to figure out if we've got a connection before I have sex with that person. The interesting thing about that conversation was it split the nation, every viewer down the middle. I think about my own childhood where we didn't have much money, like we had a lot of scarcity, right? And I've sort of got to a point in my life where I've battled through that. I've created this life that I really, really want, and I know what my goals and ambitions are. And I suppose my assumption was that Maria's occupation, there was a certain level of income attached to it, which wouldn't give us as a partnership the life that I had envisaged for us. Archaic views of men and women in relationships where men feel this pressure to be a provider and probably, if they are struggling financially, aren't able to communicate the fact that they're struggling to women because it makes them feel like less of a man.
Is it a test?
Every time.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't know, and I don't know if you'll be able to confirm, Tash said to me that Tom Stroud from Love is Blind UK. Welcome to the podcast. Really glad you can make it today.
Thanks, Gemma. It's good to meet you, and I'm excited about today.
For people who've been following you, you probably don't need an introduction, but if you could indulge me for a moment, I came across this. I normally don't read introduction, by the way, but I came across this, and this goes. Tom, 38, is a PR consultant from London. He's been one of the most popular cast members of the Love is Blind series, a self-confessed mummy's boy. Tom has been single for years. His 30s has been focused on personal growth and climbing up professionally. The self-described Colin Firth, if you bought him on Temu, is now ready for love. What did I miss from the introduction?
Do you know what? That's not bad. I think you've flattered me a little bit there by saying one of the more popular castmates, because I don't know about that. The Colin Firth thing is something funny, which has followed me around the internet because people think that I'm a cheap version of Colin Firth, basically, which is hilarious.
Well, you're a version of it, apparently.
Oh, apparently so, yeah, which is very flattering, I guess. But yeah, the rest, all of the above is true. I think it's a pretty good articulation. You know, Love is Blind always make you have these sort of like cast cards and these little bios which tend to sum you up in a couple of sentences. But one of the things that was also talked about was my sort of desire to lead a slightly less traditional life, I guess, which was a big part of my storyline.
When you went on the show, you talk about being a PR consultant, and I think that didn't come across at the very beginning. It eventually became such a big part to yourself, right? How did you end up in this industry? What was the storyline? And was that the first industry you started in?
So, yeah, good question. I mean, I had a childhood which was quite tumultuous at times, quite difficult, and it's very academic, but had a bit of a wobble when I was 14, 15 and ended up dropping out of college at one point when I was 17 and going around in a white van with an ex-squaddy fixing people's TVs for a year. And my mum eventually convinced me to go back to college, but I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I think that's something which young people sort of share is I think there's this expectation that when people are in their late teens, they know exactly what they want from life. I think it's a big problem with the education system is that it takes people longer than that to figure that stuff out. But I ended up going to university in Bristol, did marketing, was always like, well, this is quite an interesting industry because it's creative. It was like the coolest part of the world of business was what my interpretation of it, and loved the idea of PR because it's about communicating, it's about creativity. Sort of loved that idea of like PR agency environment with beanbags and pool tables, and how much of that is actually relevant now, probably very little. But yeah, I ended up going to London, doing an internship, having to work on the weekends in a pub to make ends meet, and got my first job from there.
You started right from the university days?
Yeah.
No other industry?
No, I've been in PR my whole life, my whole career since I was 23.
And you said you loved the intensity of it.
This is such an interesting topic.
You still love the intensity of it.
Well, I'm sure that you can identify with this, Gemma, given your role as well. You get used to like the high intensity environments and the sort of, I guess, the stress and worry that comes with it. And, you know, I really enjoy that pace of work, and that sort of ends up bleeding into other areas of your life as well. Like I've always been quite fast moving, someone that likes to get shit done, and sorry for the swearing. But yeah, like I think that buzz and that intensity is really, really exciting. It's only as I've got a bit older that I've thought, well, I still enjoy that buzz, but maybe I want to do it for slightly less time every week. And that was the whole idea with going into consulting rather than slogging my guts out in a full-time role.
It's interesting you talk about this, because going back to the point about intensity, I do relate. And I do find it hard sometimes explaining it to friends, you know, when some of them would probably be like, yeah, I would love to work from home a bit more. I do enjoy the one day of working from home because it's mentally nice to just have a break and get things done.
Yeah.
But I feel like on a day where it's really quiet and nothing's happening, because I'm like, it being in a corporate world, if there's nothing happening in terms of news flow, no big events happening, I just find my day super boring. I mean, I do get that people will find it hard to relate, but I think just the intensity of it keeps me going.
No, I'm exactly the same. There's this big debate at the moment about working remotely versus working in office. And my view is that there are so many parts of my job where I enjoy them so much more when I'm around other people. But also I think if you're ever doing any sort of like project delivery or activation work where you have to work in a team to deliver something, I always found it's a lot easier to do that in person, because you can bounce ideas off each other. You know, you can communicate a lot more easily than you can when you're at home. But I also just really enjoy the environment and being around other people. Like doing a fully remote role, I'd find quite challenging at times because you need other people to bounce stuff off.
But do you think your priorities have changed?
100%. I mean, I spent my 20s and early 30s just being very, very ambitious. And a lot of that was about, I suppose, my own sense of self. And I thought that, you know, my job was the only thing in my life pretty much which gave me purpose and identity. So I was like, right, if that's the case, then I want to get as far up the ladder as quickly as I can. And I think a lot of people would be able to identify with that. And then you sort of take a bit of a step back and do quite a lot of therapy and realise that actually, like, your sense of self and who you are comprises of far more than what you do for a job. And, you know, it was at that point that I thought, well, actually, I need to start maybe focusing a little bit more on things like my family relationships and maintaining and nurturing my friendships and, you know, doing more things for other people, really being a bit more sort of community focused. So, yeah, that's the reason for my sort of slowing down in pace, I guess, when it comes to work stuff.
Fair. Look, my perception of a PR consultant is that it is, to your point, like it's a people's job. Like you need to be a people person. It takes a lot of interpersonal skills, networking skills, and that probably gets sharp over time. It's a bit of a trial error when you first join, and over time you build your own connection, your own portfolio of brands and campaigns you probably work with.
Yeah.
Let's get to Love is Blind. How much of that did you take into the show?
It's a really good question. And do you know what? I actually got a bit of stick at times online because
I presume you probably did.
Yeah, because PR has a bad reputation, which is kind of ironic given it's all about managing reputation, right? But people were like, he works in PR, so although he said that thing which seemed maybe quite deep and insightful, that's his PR shtick and that's not the real Tom. There was no strategy at all going into that, because going to the experiment, I was like, you can't pretend to be a version of someone or be something that you're not, because you're going to be on TV for 2 months and eventually you're going to get found out, and it's far harder to try and scale back and say, oh, I didn't mean that, or it came across the wrong way, than it is to be honest and authentic. And if I was to have any strategy, it would just be to be myself. And I had a couple of PR bloopers in the show, which, like, I'm sure everyone would recognise. And, you know, it's been really interesting looking back on those. But, you know, there were a couple of things that I look back on and I looked at and I kind of winced, and I was like, that was either ugly behaviour or it was ill-informed or it was judgmental. But on the whole, you know, I'm happy that I was honest, and that was all that you should be when you're going into reality TV.
The bloopers and the ugly moments, as you say, for those who haven't watched the reunion, these were terms that you expressed when it was time for you to take accountability of some of the things that did transpire throughout the show. I suppose as part of your job, one of the things that you probably have to deal with is PR crisis management, right? If something with certain brands or campaigns didn't go well, there perhaps is a strategy around it. We've seen it with celebrities. I presume that also takes place with actual corporates, institutions and firms.
Yeah.
when you reflected on your own experience having watched the show, my take on this is that taking accountability has been great, and that's been, I don't want to use the word strategy, but been your way of dealing with it. And two, humor.
Yeah.
You've been quite funny about certain things, and I've seen people commenting on things, and you've been just like quite funny about it.
Yeah.
Do you think that was the way to deal with it? Almost not strategically, but thoughtfully.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, there's two parts to your question there. So, like, if I was to think about this from a sort of corporate or a brand point of view, like, absolutely, the first part is so right, because at the end of the day, whether you're a human being or an individual, or whether you're a brand, like, you have to understand what the truth is, and if you've mucked up, then be accountable for it. That's so important. But it was interesting reflecting back on, there's a part of the show where I'm quite judgmental about Maria's career as a makeup artist, and that judgment was informed off not having enough information and being judgmental based off my own prejudice rather than actually really understanding that industry fully. And what I learned from it was, actually, it's silly to make judgments based off gut feel. Like, the only way that you can ever be empowered enough to make a judgment about something is by having all the information at your fingertips. So, if you're going to translate that into the corporate world, then I'd say the same thing for brands. Like, if you're going to put your head above the parapet and stand up for what you believe in as a brand, you need to make sure that you know everything about it before you do, because the minute you put yourself out there, it's going to get received one way or another, and you need to have got the backing and the information to make that decision. But the second point around humour is not appropriate to brands, I'd say, because I'm a human being, and
you can do it. It's fine for you.
Exactly, that's the thing. And you do see brands like having a humorous approach to their marketing, and I think that's quite good, because that gives them a human quality which people can relate to. But when it comes to dealing with crisis or dealing with difficult moments, don't use humour if you're a brand. But as a human being, it's okay, because at the end of the day, I'm a human being. It's part of my personality.
But you said at some point that you did go on to therapy after the show, and you've had time to digest this, because from what we know, this was recorded last year, and then you get to see it unravel this year, and we all get to see it at the same time. When you did reflect on it, was it just owing up to things that did transpire and going in saying, I'll take accountability for what I've said, and I'll probably dig into some of the deep-rooted belief systems maybe I had?
Exactly that. That's exactly right, And it made me do a lot of my own research to understand where judgment comes from. And from my own personal point of view, and what I've found out through therapy and through doing my own work, is that my judgment in that moment was about, I suppose, kind of protecting myself, because I think about my own childhood where we didn't have much money, like we had a lot of scarcity, right? And I've sort of got to a point in my life where I've battled through that. I've created my own way in life. I've created this life that I really, really want, and I know what my goals and ambitions are. And I suppose my assumption was that Maria's occupation, there was a certain level of income attached to it, which wouldn't give us as a partnership the life that I had envisaged for us. But like I said, it was an assumption. It wasn't based off the reality. And what I've since found out is that, that industry can be amazing, and you can be ambitious, and it can pay well. So, like, that's what I mean about your own sort of experiences dictate your judgments, but actually you have to question them back yourself and be a lot more accountable for them.
Not to defend you, Tom, but I think we all have certain preconceptions. I think if you asked anyone, what do they think of people in the corporate world, in finance, I'm sure there's the certain judgment about being superficial, chasing money, not being much creative outside of the corporate world. So I think everyone has certain preconceptions, except that you probably got to voice it a bit more publicly than the rest of us.
Well, no, that's exactly right. And the interesting thing about that conversation was it split the nation. It split every viewer down the middle, because a lot of people were saying, like, yeah, I judge people for their job all the time. Like, that's really important to me. And even in the world of dating, like, you see it on dating apps, like people will often make assumptions about whether or not they are compatible with that person based off what their occupation is. And so I think you have to acknowledge that there's always going to be an element of that. But what I would say to people is, like, before you make that judgment, make sure that you know exactly what the full picture is, because sometimes it can be very different from what your initial bias suggests.
But do you not think that's a bit challenging? Because on dating apps, all it takes is a few seconds before you swipe left or right, right? You don't get that full picture until you get to meet that person.
Yeah.
And then you do realize there's maybe a connection. The number of times you and I maybe have swiped left or right based on education, looks, profession.
Yeah.
It happens so quickly.
Oh my God, I mean, this is a much bigger conversation around dating apps and how kind of superficial they are, you know? But to bring it back to the show, like my engagement to Maria wasn't based off those superficial things. I mean, it wasn't based off what we looked like for obvious reasons because we were dating blind. It wasn't based off her occupation because I'd already sort of established that I had a certain judgmental bias towards that. It was based off our like connection and almost these intangible things, which like, you can't even put a finger on it. I went off genuine gut feel with that, and being completely frank with you, there were other people in that experiment who, when you look at the more traditional things that might dictate whether or not you're suitable, like, you know, income, occupation, goals, ambitions, there were probably people in there that were more suitable for me, but I went off something which is a lot harder to describe, and I've always said, like, I'll never regret that decision.
Speaking of people perhaps more suited to you, on these specific criteria that we just talked about, you had two strong connections in the show.
Yeah.
Tash, who was actually here last week.
No.
She was.
Doing your podcast?
Yeah, she was here.
Oh my God, that's amazing.
We're probably going to have hers out this weekend.
Yeah.
She spoke very highly of you.
Good. She left me about 8 minutes worth of voice notes last night. So
you left her a voice note.
Right.
Well, the show. That probably might be part of a little teaser, maybe.
Okay, fine.
See, you've got heads up now. You had a strong connection with her. You had a strong connection with Marie as well. I know you said you followed your gut feeling, and in the modern dating world, you probably meet someone, if you have a genuine connection, for 3-4 months before you decide, you know, are we taking it to the next level? The next level being, is that an official thing? Or are we going to date for another 2-3 years? Whatever that goal may be for you.
Yeah.
In this particular instance, where everything is amplified, it's going much quicker. There's an actual legal wedding.
Yeah.
For people who don't know, it's legal. It's official. Why let your head, or rather, why let your heart
or your head
get over your head? If that's so important to you, I think that's probably why you got a lot of criticism as well, right? That was so important to you. And I think Maria said it on one, she did an interview as well with the girls, and she said you and her actually knew that you were going to say no, but you still went through it.
Yeah.
So take us from, you know, the time that you won the pods, you knew that was important to you, and we've seen snippets of that, to the moment where you decided that was so fundamental to you that it doesn't really make sense. Go for a yes.
So it's a really good question. My belief prior to going to that experiment was that intangible feeling, that connection, is by far and away the most important part of a romantic relationship. My belief was that everything else, so job, income, interests, goals, they're your things that you can compromise on, right? But if you don't have that connection, then it's pointless. That's the difference between a friendship and a romantic relationship. And, you know, reflecting on that now, sadly, it's made my, I guess, criteria, like the traits that I look for in a partner, a lot more specific. And I think you need the intangible stuff that I've just talked about, that connection, but you also need to share goals and ambitions. And and I think that's why it's so difficult to find someone like long term that you're going to settle down with, because, you know, you need to tick pretty much every box, really.
Do you not think this experience has perhaps made it harder for you now?
100%. This is the worry for me about it, you know, and it's really, really good to learn from your experiences, and I learned so much from Love is Blind. But yeah, I do worry that, you know, maybe now I'm going to be even more specific in terms of what I'm looking for, and I'm getting on a bit, so I don't know what that says about my chances of finding someone, but I'd be really, really interested to see what other people's viewpoints are, particularly those people in sort of successful, happy marriages. And even that point around spending time by yourself, like, that's one of my criteria in a partner, is that there are things which I want to do which make me me. And I think some of the most unhealthy relationships that I've seen is where you have this codependence, where people just rely on each other, because if you then decide that you don't want to be in that relationship anymore, it makes it very difficult to get out of, because that person you are dependent on might be dependent on them financially, you know, particularly with that traditional male-female construct where men are the providers and women stay at home. Like, that would scare me if I was a woman that was financially dependent on someone. So I think, having and keeping a level of independence in a relationship is really, really important, because the other thing is that independence, that idea of who you are, that's what the other person's been attracted to in the first place, right? So if you lose that, then you might lose that attraction. Like, I always want to remember who I am, and when I have a relationship, I don't want to be dependent on someone. I want to have someone that complements or enhances my life already.
Judging by the comments on your Instagram, I don't think that's going to be hard. But unless you actually go for sort of, let me meet all of you, come to London on a particular day, speed dating. No, that's a bad idea. Don't listen to me. Something else you mentioned on the show, ensuring that you do have a sexual compatibility to that person. And you actually alluded to the fact that you've worked really hard on ensuring that. Can I ask if this was based on previous dating relationships, which is why that has become so important to you?
Yeah, so I got a bit of stick. I mean, what I've learned about social media is that whatever you say on TV, is going to be divisive and polarizing, right? Particularly with such a global show. And I got a little bit of stick because I'd said in the pods that I felt that sort of intimate sexual connection with Maria, and like, that's not something that I regret in the slightest, because that's so important as part of a relationship. Like, that's for me the difference between a relationship and a friendship, right? And I've spoken to a lot of women in particular over the past couple of weeks who have said and expressed this view that they feel like if you have that emotional connection, then the sexual stuff can grow out of it. So you can get to know someone emotionally and then find them more attractive intimately, which is an interesting take. And
I would agree.
Right.
I don't know if that's a female thing, but I can see why. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. So, and I think it is something which women probably find a lot easier to do than men do, because of just the biology, I guess. And like, men are maybe a little bit more visual initially and go a lot more off that like initial lust. But the healthiest relationships that I've seen are when, from a man's perspective, that lust dies down and then they still have that intimacy with their partner, but it's based off all of those emotional building blocks. So, and even things like their sexual compatibility, like their sex life doesn't die down because that initial lust goes, but then they just want to feel that closeness and that sort of level of like compassion and intimacy with their partner.
I think it probably goes to dating has evolved, obviously, and there's a hookup culture.
Yeah.
I'm not here to say that's right or not. Like, everyone has a different preference, but I think there's a hookup culture. There are people out there wanting to date a bit more seriously with intent and looking for something more meaningful.
Yeah.
I think it's also a question of timing. Like, how long do you date before you approach the conversation of intimacy? And I've found that over time, some people, and I know this from speaking to friends, and maybe perhaps more women than men, that you'd rather take your time to get to know the person.
Yeah.
So I'm just like, I don't know if you've heard of a rule, I don't kiss on the first date, I kiss on the third date, something of a sort. But I think if you extend that to intimacy, I'd rather get to know the person on a more connected, intimate level, and then take the physical intimacy and explore it at that stage.
100%.
I think it's a women's thing, maybe. I don't know if men think of it that way.
A lot less men do, would be my
Right.
hypothesis. But I think that's because men don't know what's good for them most of the time, though. Like,
Yeah.
honestly, my genuine opinion is, I think a lot of guys think that I need to have sex with someone to figure out whether or not we've got a connection. Whereas actually the approach should be, I need to figure out if we've got a connection before I have sex with that person, right? So it should be the other way around, because speaking from my own experience, like, when you have that emotional intimacy with someone, when you feel comfortable around them, when you feel confident around them, your sex is going to be way better. Like, of course it is, versus just having this, like, you know, met them on the first date, got a bit drunk, taken them home, and, you know, which does happen, particularly in London, you know, that hookup culture which you referenced. So, but it's difficult. And like, London dating in particular is wild. And I've spoken about this so much because the problem with living in a city of 10 million people is that there's so much choice, and, you know.
But that doesn't help equally.
Right. Hey, you don't think so?
No. I mean, I don't know. You tell me. I feel like having choice, you would think that's a good thing.
No, I totally agree. It's not a good
thing.
But
it doesn't help.
No, it's a bad thing. It's a really bad thing. And if you look at or contrast that versus our parents, or even a generation above our parents, our grandparents, right, where their environments, they would exist in these small communities whereby, you know, they'd meet someone, they didn't have all that choice, they'd meet someone, they'd be like, okay, well, I quite like them, I'm going to get to know them because they're the only person that maybe they're the only option I have, right? Rather than being like, oh, that person's cute, but they've got a little freckle in their eye, and there's someone else I'm chatting to who doesn't have that little freckle, you know? So,
but he doesn't have that. The other thing.
Exactly. So, but I think because of that, and because maybe they need to make certain compromises and also a certain level of commitment to that person in our grandparents' generation, they were much more likely to see success and see the thing that they wanted, which was eventually like a loving relationship. So I often think like maybe we need to take more elements of old school dating rather than dating apps, which have given us so much choice, but too much choice, you know?
Can I ask you?
Yeah.
Are you picky?
More picky now than I've ever been. And this is a problem.
I know we've talked a lot about the provider theme, and we've talked about you maybe in the past having gone for a certain type of woman.
Yeah.
How do you think Love is Blind has changed things for you in terms of what you would still look for in a woman?
Yeah.
And maybe some of the things that you would actually exclude from that tick box list?
So I think, I mean, Maria had a lot of the qualities that I would look for in a woman. You know, she's very, very independent. She speaks her mind. She knows who she is. She's got that sort of witty humour, which I just find is absolutely essential for me. And she's someone that, you know, when I take the piss out of her, she'd take the piss out of me even harsher back. And I love that. Like, that's for me what keeps a relationship alive. But like, you know, physical attributes, I'm not even going to talk about because I think that's so dependent on the person. Like, you know, for me, there's like, yeah, I wouldn't say I have a type physically at all. It's just dependent on how someone carries himself, I think. But what the show has made me realise is that I have certain goals and ambitions in my life, and a big part of that is about working flexibly. A big part of that is about travelling and seeing as much of the world as I can. And actually, I need a partner that shares those same goals and ambitions, because, you know, you can compromise to an extent, but if that is like something which is inbuilt in me, you know, it's very, very unlikely I'm going to meet someone who is that special to me that I'm going to disregard all of that, which is a big part of my being and who I am, to go and, you know, move to a semi-detached house in Luton and drive a Toyota Yaris into work every day. You know, that's just not me. And I think sometimes opposites can attract, but when it comes to your core values and your ambitions, you need to find someone that's of a similar mindset to you.
I know you've got a lot of flack for being very open about what you want from your life, really, online, but you'd rather be honest with yourself, even if that means getting some people angry over the internet, right? Like, this is what you want eventually from your life. It's your life.
Well, exactly. This is the thing. And I think the reason why, you know, certain people get frustrated is because what I want from my life is completely different to them, and it holds up a mirror to themselves, and they're like, you know, either this is the only way that life should be lived, is the way that I've been taught to live my life, or the way that I want to live my life, which, you know, is a shame, because, you know, I'm as open as I can be to taking on board other people's points of view, but I understand that's very difficult for people. But maybe a little bit of it as well is just about, like, I don't know, like, maybe people do have those ambitions that are deep within themselves, and they don't actually want to sort of allow them to come out. Maybe people are a bit unhappy in their lives. Like, I certainly think I can't ever think of a scenario whereby I'd go onto the internet and like criticize someone heavily that I've seen on TV, but some people do, and it's really interesting to understand the reason why people do want to sort of do that.
Speaking of your whole experience, it's almost, to me, it felt like you had two storylines, right? And I know we've talked about this on emails briefly. There was the cultural difference bit, and then there was you were portrayed as the 50-50 guy, which we're going to talk about in a second. Let's stick to the cultural differences for a second. The reason I ask this is because I think it's been quite almost like mixed, and no one knows, you know, what storyline are we really talking about. Can I ask you, was this the first time you dated someone who was culturally different from you?
Yeah, it was. It was the first time that I dated a Muslim. And it was, the first time I dated anyone that I suppose had grown up with different religious views to what I was raised with. So, but if I'm like completely honest with you, that never had any bearing on our dynamic or the decision that I made. You know, if anything, the way that Maria described her faith, like, they were all amazing things. So, like, in terms of that sense of community and how they all really, really looked out for each other, like, her family values were just amazing, like astoundingly good. And having met her family, I could see how close-knit they all were. So, but I mean, the other thing about like this topic of religion is, like, I don't know how many Muslim people there are in the world, but it's going to be in the billions, right? And within that religion, you can't just badge everyone and say that they're all the same, because the degree of like faith that you might take, or your interpretation of that faith completely differs. And I've had messages from Muslim people from all around the world, and some of them have been very maybe traditional and they haven't agreed with my views. Some of them have been like on board with my views. So I think that's one of the dangerous things about, you know, that narrative is that it's painted as like, you know, atheist or agnostic white guy versus Moroccan Muslim woman, and it's so much more nuanced than that. And I really, really wish that people could actually just see, like, I wish that the narrative was, in spite of their differences, look at the amazing connection that they had. That would be the cherry on the cake for me.
Yeah, because the reason I bring it up is that has also come up as, you know, this was probably a big driver behind your decision to say no.
Yeah. And
it's almost like we need to separate both storylines and look at what was the actual pragmatic driver behind your decision.
Exactly that. And it obviously it's come out now, because the way that wedding episode was shown was that it looked like I'd jilted Maria at the altar, which wasn't the reality of the situation, sadly. And I think I can only speak from my own experience. I was obviously disappointed with how that was portrayed, because you know, because I took a lot of flack for it. But of equal importance is, I think it was a real shame that Maria, who comes from, you know, a religion which like has been or can be quite divisive to certain more traditional British people, that the way that it was shown that she was jilted at the altar and she was a victim, because she wasn't a victim. She was someone that was incredibly strong and able to make up her own mind, you know, and she didn't get dumped. Like it was a mutual decision. So I felt as much of a shame for her as I did for myself.
The second part to that question was a 50-50 conversation.
Yeah.
I do think, and my read of it is that what you really meant was somehow along the lines of equity versus equality. Who pays more depending on your level of income? Is it going to be more of a proportionate conversation? And it's really funny. I was telling you earlier, I had a female matchmaker on this show, and she and I talked at length about this, and we talked about my belief of equity versus equality. And it's interesting that you guys almost, even if it was a tiny or trivial thing such as paying for an ice cream, it sparks so many conversations, which I think was really important, because in the modern dating world, so what I say to the matchmaker was that every time I do go on first dates, or now after my breakup, obviously the guy I tend to go on dates with, I would know what they do professionally and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
And still, probably get a lot of criticism for this, but still, when it comes to paying the bill, I always offer, even on the first date.
Is it a test,
every time?
Gemma?
No. I always offer. And depending on whether the guys say, no, I've got this, or yeah, fine, we'll split, it changes the dynamic for me.
Interesting. No, and I think that's perfectly normal.
Because if I've had a good date, I just really want you to show that you've actually enjoyed the date as much. And for me, it's also because I know I'll be seeing you again.
Yeah.
And throughout my relationship, for our dates, I've always sort of taken turns. I don't like splitting, by the way. I'm like, let me get there.
Yeah. Great.
But what I mean, particularly in this case, like the moment of splitting the bills, or like depending on how he responds to it, it's not really a test. I just say it. And you know what? Another friend who's a teacher, she said to me, like, every time she goes on a first date, she just sits back and let the guy pay. And I'm like, I can't do it.
Yeah.
To my own detriment in a way, because financially I end up paying. But I just can't. Like, I feel awkward not saying a thing. So I don't know what to call it, defense mechanism, the way I react, I'm like, shall we split? Or like, oh, whatever.
Yep. I mean, this thing...
It's a big debate.
It's massive. And even just right, like, I think people actually worry about it when they go on dates, because they don't know what the right thing to do is. And so you saying that you think the right thing to do is to offer, like, absolutely right. But then I suppose a lot of women would be like, the right thing to do is to let the man pay. And I would always cover the first date, but it's not because the person I'm dating is a woman. It's not about gender at all. It's because more often than not, I've asked that person out, and therefore I think as a gesture, it's a lovely thing to do. But equally, like, I mean, I've had many dates where, you know, we've gone out for dinner, had a lovely dinner, and then we'll go out for a drink afterwards. I think it's a lovely gesture if my date then might cover a drink afterwards.
Yes.
You know, I think, because that shows a level of, I suppose, appreciation for the date and the company. I've got, and you touched on this just now, like, I've got pals, like girl pals, who their view is that if it's been a date that they've enjoyed, they'll let the guy pay. But if it's someone that they don't ever want to see again because they're just like, oh, get them out of my life, it's been a terrible date, they'll go 50-50 because they don't want to feel indebted to that person. So, like, there are so many different points of view on it. And, I mean, you touched on this, like, I think it's absolutely amazing. Now that the dust has settled and I'm out of the woods a little bit with it all, amazing that it's opened up this whole conversation, because finances is a really, really touchy subject for a lot of people. And I think if more couples and more people that are dating were open about it, it would save a lot of arguments in the long run. Like, honestly, I'm going to start a campaign for Bumble, Hinge and Tinder to put what is your financial contribution perspective on your profile, because they have fucking star signs.
You need to patent theirs before anything anything else comes out of it.
But this is the thing. Wouldn't that be interesting? Because then you, like, I think a lot of the reason why I get for the first date is not because of my morals. It's because I'm like, I don't want an awkward situation. I don't want to get a situation, but where I feel uncomfortable. So yeah, no, like I say, it's really positive, I guess, that it sparked all this conversation and debate.
I just think it's a super important conversation because statistically, like, I don't know what's the range, but from what I've seen, like 20 to 40% of marriages end because of finances.
Yep.
Like, it's such a... You've done your homework. Yeah. It's such a practical conversation that you need to have. Even like Freddie is bringing up, like, you know, the whole prenup conversation. Yeah. It is a pragmatic thing to talk about.
No, I totally agree. The stat is, in the US this year, 38% of divorce cases cited financial difficulties as the reason for the divorce, or one of the reasons. So it's huge. And I suppose, imagine getting to a point in your relationship with someone that you're married to where you're not able to communicate about this stuff openly. Like, it boggles my mind. And I think this, again, comes back to these, in my view, archaic views of men and women in relationships, where men feel this pressure to be a provider, and probably, if they are struggling financially, aren't able to communicate the fact that they're struggling to women, because it makes them feel like less of a man. But like, I would look at it more as, I'd always look at a relationship as like a partnership where you're both inputting into that partnership as partners. So, you know, you talked about equity, right? And, you know, my view on that is exactly the same as yours, I think, whereby if I earn 100k, my partner earns 30k, then we input proportionally to our income, because that's fair in my view. But there are many other ways that you can contribute in a relationship. You know, I see a lot of comments on my social media about, like, well, what about like women giving birth and raising a child? And I'm like, absolutely, that's such a huge contribution to a relationship, and the guy obviously isn't able to reflect that contribution themselves. So, you know, that's where, if the woman wants to take care of the child and be a stay-at-home mum, then the guy obviously goes out and earns. But my personal perspective on that is, I would want to be involved in my kid's life as well, and I wouldn't want to be doing 60-hour weeks and then seeing them 15 minutes at the end of every day. So I'd really like to go part-time and have a bit more of a role in my child's life. And if my wife wanted to work a couple of days a week to give her maybe a sense of identity and purpose, and then look after the kid for the other 5 days, that's absolutely fine with me. You know, it's just all about communication, I think. So.
The ideal thing would be in a gender equal society where we wouldn't have to use the word gender at all. Yeah. But biologically, as you mentioned, we are constructed differently. Men are a bit more pragmatic, women are a bit more nurturing. Yeah. There's a reason why, you know, John Gray said at some point, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? But when you think about your own experience and your own conditioning in a way, a big point of discussion with your storyline was being raised by a single mom. Yeah. And I think your two sisters came on the show as well.
Yeah, they did, yeah.
When you compare your experience of, you know, this is what I've learned from my childhood, but I just want to be different when I have my own family. Yeah. How's your behavior around your sisters? The reason I ask is, do you feel then you become somewhat more of a provider? And by provider, I don't really mean monetary terms, but more in terms of emotional capacity. When they talk about their dating experiences, and I don't know what's the relationship status, but when they talk about the dating experience, do you feel that whole narrative that we've touched on changes a little bit as a brother?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I mean, the relationship that I have with my sisters is pretty different to a traditional. So my sisters are my dad's kids. So they're my half sisters, right? And we didn't have a relationship until I was 30.
Right.
And then yes, families are very, very complicated, and mine's particularly complicated. But so I've only known them as adults. Like they first came into my life properly when they were 18 and 16. But to answer your question, there is a level of protection that I feel particularly towards Anya, my younger sister, because she's single. Megan's in a very happy relationship and a very traditional relationship, and that makes her feel good and safe and secure. But with Anya in particular, I've seen her make good decisions and bad decisions, and I do feel very protective and nurturing over her. So I suppose to that point, that is more of a traditional masculine role. But interestingly, what I'd say is when the show's come out, she's reflected that protection back to me, and she is like my biggest cheerleader and someone that will back me until the cows come home and is constantly checking in with me to make sure that I'm okay. So, I think we are very much equals when it comes to that kind of stuff, and I suppose that chucks the whole view of me being a man and her being a woman out the window, because we mirror each other's behaviour.
Did you guys talk about this whole theme offline?
So much,
right.
I mean, she'll see stuff on social media and flag it to me before I've even had a chance to look at it. She's obsessed with it, and she was very nervous about being on the show for the same reasons that a lot of people would be, where she was like, I don't know how I'm going to look or how I'm going to come across, and she got so much positive reception off the back of it.
She did.
Yeah.
If you had to reinvent Love is Blind, which has been, I think the reason and I mentioned this to Tash last week, the reason it's been so well received is that versus the US version, the candidates who are on the show, I think age-wise, it's somewhat more of a plausible age to think about marriage or even, a more serious relationship. And then practical issues such as like finance, Nicole who was divorced, Freddie's prenup, like all these are like quite tangible and concrete conversation that need to take place. And the show was really well received for that particular reason, in my view. If you had to reinvent the show, other than time, I guess, right? Because, I don't know, is that like 2 months to get to know someone, to get married? I don't know. What else do you think you'd do to make it sort of more relevant to the real world?
It's difficult, right? Because the show gets a bit of stick because it doesn't feel like it's representative enough, and I completely agree with that. Like, I don't feel like there aren't people that have disabilities within that show. There aren't people that have different sexual orientation, and I do agree with that. Like, they cast people that come from quite a traditional mould, like certainly in terms of their ages and maybe in terms of their physical appearance, but it's really, really hard because, I mean, we've even spoken about Maria and I come from very different worlds, and actually that was a big part of the reason why we didn't work out. So you do need to cast people that have a certain level of similarity, I think, because otherwise it's not going to be a success, and you're not going to get people that are in tune with each other. And so as much as I'd love for it to be more representative and more diverse, I think the success rate of the show would be a lot lower because people exist in tribes, right? Like, that's how it's human nature. And so like, my moral point of view is that it needs to be more diverse, but the reality of it is actually I can understand the reasons or the decisions they make in their casting process.
One thing I didn't know, and I don't know if you'll be able to confirm, Tash said to me that there's a whole vetting process and there's a questionnaire, you get on a call. She said that you don't get to know, but apparently the production would have introduced participants such that it's almost like perfect match. I haven't watched it, but I know the concept.
Right.
That you would have the person, or maybe more, that you meant to match with. Except like connection can take it somewhere else, as we're probably seeing in this case.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true?
Yeah, so this was something I had a rumour about and it is very, very clear that there are people in there that on paper you are perfect for. Because there was a girl in there called Liv who didn't make the final cut. She ended up getting engaged to an Irish guy called Connor, who's a really, really good pal of mine, and went to see him in Dublin.
I may have seen him, I think.
Oh, he's the most handsome, charismatic, top of the morning tea Irish man that you've ever seen in your life. But yeah, Liv and I had clearly been matched on paper because she works in creative agencies. She likes going to wanky places in London. We had quite a similar upbringing and relationship with our dads, and so it was very apparent very early on in our dates that we had all these similarities. But this is exactly what I mean. Liv and I just had a friendship. We didn't have that intangible connection thing. It was it was just like catching up with someone that you have loads of stuff in common with. There was never a romantic spark there. And isn't it crazy that you can feel a romantic spark without being around someone? You can just hear it in someone's voice and how they talk and how they represent themselves, you know? That's the amazing thing about the experiment. And honestly, I mean, I'm not going to go into dates moving forwards with a paper bag over my head, but I did learn a lot about the intangible, non-physical stuff.
There's a restaurant not far from where you are, right? Dans le Noir. Do you know that one?
But dating in the dark?
I say it the French way. But yeah. Have you been?
No, I haven't.
Imagine if you could do dating there.
That would be very helpful, I think.
Very last question. What's your favourite red lipstick brand?
Oh, great one. Whichever one will give me a brand deal, to be honest. I was really thinking about, given how judgmental I was about makeup artists, like doing a little...
So funny.
Yeah, doing a little video on my Instagram of like me trying to apply lipstick to myself, because it would just be absolutely terrible. I don't know if I'm quite willing to do that.
No, but on a more serious note, the very last question is about your therapy session. Yeah. I've seen quite recently in your stories that you might be sharing snippets from those conversations. What's the plan there?
Yeah, so like I don't have any desire to use this platform to be like a influencer, you know, that's not really my bag. I don't want to be like showing like how I get ready every morning, but you know, I talked a bit about having quite a difficult childhood and having to work through a lot of that trauma. And I think particularly in men, but in men and women, there's this stigma around therapy. It can be quite alienating to people, the idea of talking to a therapist. And I'm starting to pick up a lot from my own social channels where people are actually like, I don't even understand it, like, what is it? And so, you know, put something out on my stories a couple of days ago, just saying like, look, these are the kind of topics that I've just covered in the last couple of therapy sessions that I've done.
Mm-hmm.
Any of you guys identify with these? Like, is it something which you might want to hear a little bit about from a therapist? And these are topics like being aware of your own ego. They're topics like, I feel like I'm addicted to social media and I can't get off my phone. There are topics like, I felt a lot of abandonment as a kid because one of my parents wasn't around. And what I would really love to do is give people like just little short outtakes from a therapist's point of view. So I'm going to be putting those out over the next couple of weeks. And it's really scary for me to do that. But if I am able to like help people by communicating my own experience to them, then that's something which would make me feel really good, because it adds a lot of value to other people's lives.
I think it's a great initiative, and
scary.
And I think it's amazing, like all the good that you're doing. I don't know if you realize it, but you're giving back a lot to the community.
Thanks.
And I think it's really great to finally, we've had a few men on the show.
Yeah.
But I feel like, I don't know if it's the setup, but I feel somewhat, it's really nice when men feel so vulnerable and are open up and really share. And I think it's a really great one for other men who are listening to you. We need to hear it more.
Well, this is it, man. Honestly, the whole area of mental health and stuff is complicated. And for men in particular, like you hear these terms like gratitude journaling and mindfulness, and I just think they're confusing. So if I can do anything at all to kind of simplify that and make it a bit more understandable for people, then I'll be really happy with that. That'll be a job well done.
And I really hope some of my friends who are watching this would actually have a different view having listened to you, because I think it's really nice that you're vulnerable, but I equally feel like it's nice to have a few certain beliefs that it feels so important to you that you want to defend them, but equally being open to learning from others and what life offers to you. So thank you for being on the show. I really enjoyed chatting to you. I actually had questions. For some reason, it just felt like it was fluid.
You smashed it. It was amazing.
No, but I really hope you've enjoyed the chat as much as I did. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me.